Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel with us today. We'll chat with her in just a moment. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So Dana Nessel has served as Attorney General for the state of Michigan since 2019. Prior to that, she served as a Wayne County Prosecutor for over a decade. In her private practice, she was lead attorney for the plaintiffs in DeBoer versus Snyder, a precursor to the landmark ruling in Obergefell versus Hodges, which codified same-sex marriage and granted adoption rights to same-sex couples nationwide. General, welcome into the back room.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with last week's Michigan primary, your state. From an election integrity standpoint, was there any specific takeaways or problems, warning signs as you look towards the midterms? What was your general assessment of what took place?
Well, first of all, and I should tell you that I've spent the last several months going around the entire state and meeting with county clerks along with their municipal clerks. So I can really get a feel for what's happening on the ground from the people who are actually doing the heavy lifting. And that is the 1,600 local municipal clerks that really administer our elections. And it is the thing that makes our elections so safe and secure and reliable and democratic is that, you know that the person who is doing the work is somebody that you locally elected or your local board appointed. So it's somebody that you know that lives in your community and then you could touch base with. So in speaking to the local clerks, as always, like they're very proud of their work. Obviously, it's a mix of Democrats, Republicans, people who are not partisan at all in some cases. The elections went off very well. I mean, there's always issues here and there, right? There's a software problem here, or there's an issue where a precinct might lose electricity because of a storm. I mean, that stuff is par for the course. But for the most part, because of all the laws that Michigan voters have passed recently through citizen initiatives, we have 9 days of early voting. We have no reason absentee voting. So, a good half or so of the people who voted before Election Day. And so there's a lot less that can go wrong on Election Day itself. So, I think things went pretty well. One of the things that I think is happening, though, is you have bad actors out there that are doing everything they can to sort of test the system. So in speaking to the local clerks, there would be somebody who came in misrepresenting themselves and seeing if they could register to vote. Or folks that are wearing sort of paramilitary garb that are sort of circling the area. And we know what that is, right? It's people who are preparing to do something nefarious and illegal come the November elections. And we see this, it's been getting kind of worse and worse every election since 2020. And it's really unfortunate because we do have such a great system that is very trustworthy here. But of course, if everybody in the world is going to be like, oh, how can we make this trustworthy system seem untrustworthy? It's the worst thing you can do because it undermines people's faith and confidence in the elections, even though we haven't really had any changes in terms of, how the elections have occurred. And that is the worst thing at all, losing faith in our democracy. And I think, candidly, that's what President Trump and many of his allies want.
Yeah, well, Trump and the Justice Department sent federal election monitors into places like Detroit, Lansing, East Lansing for the primary. What do you believe they were trying to accomplish? And does this suggest a much larger federal presence in November?
Yeah, so they did come to several of our municipalities. Fortunately, the conversations happened ahead of time, so we knew where they were going to be. And who they were. They did what they are permitted to do, and candidly, what they have done in many previous elections in the past, right? They're not supposed to be disruptive. They're supposed to be keeping a watchful eye to ensure that people are not being disenfranchised in their right and their ability to vote. I don't think that's why they were there this time. I believe this is sort of a pre-litigation type of exercise where these monitors were sent in to see if they could fabricate or manufacture something that they would then go to the courts and say that, was going wrong at the polls. And, it's like, that's an unfortunate thing because that's not really supposed to be what they're doing, but that is what we are prepared for because, of course, they came in with all kinds of false accusations saying to the municipal clerks that, we're coming in because you're not handling your elections properly. And they were all lies. I mean, it's all stuff that is demonstrably false. We have had so many cases filed since I've been Attorney General. I was sworn in January 1st of 2019, and it's been nothing since that time. But, Trump and his allies, again, trying to manufacture false claims. We win in the courts all the time. So we know that these are false claims, and, whether it's state court, federal court, whether these are federal judges that are appointed by Democrats or Republicans, it's always the same, which is that we win in court. But it's the casting, the sowing the seeds of doubt is what they want to do. And that's their hope. And so we now have a number of people out there who, even though they're always invited in to see the testing of the equipment, anybody can be trained to be a poll worker. And usually when they are, that's when they really understand how the system works. And they say almost every time, wow, I didn't realize how good the system was and structured until I actually received the training. But they're playing off of people's ignorance. And when people don't know how the system works, that's when things can go wrong. And I will tell you, one of my favorite visits in the last few months was just last Friday when I went to Genesee County. And beyond meeting with all the clerks, I met with the Board of Canvassers, which is, of course, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and they canvassed the election to process the votes. And all 4 of them were best friends. They were working together collaboratively. And, these are neighbors. These are people who are community members that all they want is to make sure that the election is properly certified. And they do that in an incredibly bipartisan fashion. And that happens all over the state. But that's not what people see on TV. And it's certainly not what they hear coming from the mouth of the president.
Well, that's such a really important point because the assumption by the folks at home when they see Trump doing the things he does and spewing the rhetoric is that, oh my God, the elections are going to be in trouble. They're going to be tampered with or stolen. But we remember from 2020 what people like Brad Raffensperger, a Republican, did, Secretary of State down in Georgia. And it really should say to the people at home that regardless of what comes out of the White House, there are people who volunteered for these positions, whether it's Secretary of State on down to the poll workers. They care about democracy and they care about the integrity of our electoral process. And so there is some measure of comfort that we should all have that these folks don't look at red and blue or right and left. They look at right and wrong. And so I think that's just really important, given all the rhetoric we're hearing and all the fear-mongering, that people do remember that these are really good, honest, patriotic people, nonpartisan, who just want to protect our elections.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing, in talking to many of these clerks, obviously, in a state like ours, I mean, we have many clerks that are Republicans, but they take pride in their work as well. And so when the president, makes derogatory statements about elections, he's insulting them too, members of his own party. And so when I go to court to defend the elections in Michigan, I mean, most of these Republican clerks, they are appreciative because they're really proud of their work. And they know that the elections in their communities are a proper representation of what the voters wanted. And that's all they want is an accurate representation of how people really voted in their communities. And again, they take great pride in that work, and they should. It's not an easy job. And frankly, now of all times, it's hard to get people who want to do those jobs because of the immeasurable number of threats that, unfortunately, that local clerks are subjected to because of the president and because of his allies. And, we have a special unit in our office, the Hate Crimes and Domestic Terrorism Unit, where unfortunately we spend a great deal of our time investigating and then oftentimes prosecuting people who threaten elected officials. And more often than not, it's election clerks who are on the receiving end of those threats.
So Trump, as obviously, he's spent years claiming Michigan elections are corrupt, rigged. He recently called for an FBI investigation into election-related claims in the state. How much of what he does do you believe is rhetoric based on a desire to intimidate versus a blatant attempt by the United States president to abuse his power by using federal law enforcement to intimidate state election officials? And, we look at like the James Comey situation or Tish James, and a lot of the experts will say it's not about convictions. He doesn't want convictions. He just wants people to not sleep at night. He wants them to drain their bank accounts. He wants to intimidate. So is there a real threat of the election being stolen, or are these just all like preemptive tactics by him, as you said before, to erode trust, maybe keep people away from the polls, perhaps?
Yeah, I will take D, all of the above.
I knew you were going to say
all
that.
Of those things. He wants all those things, but he'll take what he can get.
Yeah.
Right. But at minimum, right, at least he is making people concerned about voting. And so what I'm seeing throughout the state, unfortunately, is, you have lots and lots of people who are saying, is it going to be safe for me to go to the polls?
Right.
Do I have to be concerned about ICE or federal agents, or any other, federal personnel being there? And actually, it's influencing to some extent the way that people are voting. I think there are people who might prefer to come in on election day, but they're choosing to, take an absentee ballot and drop it off at the clerk's office or to Dropbox because they don't want to see if that's really going to happen or not. We have a lot of seniors that are worried that for various reasons their votes aren't going to count. And certainly, you have clerks all over the state that they're worried, could the FBI show up at my doorstep at any time? And, it's terrible. I mean, I just can't believe that we have anybody who thinks that this is okay. But I will say that I think our clerks are more determined than ever to make sure that, again, they're getting it right, which they usually do. And, I'm just hopeful that we'll get past this really terrible period of time where we have, of all people, the president of the United States that is continually trying to undermine our faith and our confidence in elections. But it's just crazy that he will say these things over and over again. But if he gets the result he wants, then everything was great.
Right.
It's only when he doesn't that any of that comes into play. And of course, what I wonder over and over again, how is it feasible that you could have corruption only on certain races, though, on the exact same ballot?
It's so funny you said that, because literally a few years ago, I drew out an actual ballot and I posted something and I tried to walk people through. I said, this is one piece of paper. If the name at the top lost because it was rigged, how does everything below it not rigged? Like, just use your brain and try to think logically. Like, it can't happen on one piece of paper. But
right.
It's propaganda, and you're talking about it, low information voters,
It's so, yeah. It's so, ironic, though, too, because in 2020, when, of course, all these allegations of, the stolen election, it was Trump's people who were in all these critical positions of power at the DOJ, the FBI, at CISA. And so it was his people in control in 2024 when he won. There were all Biden officials that were in those powerful positions. So if the Democrats really wanted to rig or steal an election, I guess we suck at it, because I really don't think that Trump would have won every single swing state and the popular vote in 2024 if there was really a way to rig the election.
Right. Well, I'll just add to what you say and say we sucked at it in 2016. we were really good at it in 20, and then somehow we sucked at it again in 24. But I'm laughing because I'm like listening to myself when I hear you talk, because I say this all the time. It's like, if the elections were all rigged, you guys won you won everything. You have the White House, you have the Senate, you have the House. Who is it rigged for? Who is it rigged against? You control everything. It makes no sense. But I guess when you're in a cult,
it's just to throw them off. You know what I mean? Like, we're rigging it, but we don't want anyone to know. And to make it so much less obvious, we're going to make sure that you win every single thing.
Yeah. Well, it's like the weaponization of government thing, where it's like Biden weaponized government by indicting his own son. Like, just think about it for a second. So Trump and Republicans repeatedly claim widespread non-citizen voting, but what does the evidence say?
Well, there's very little of it, right? And they have done extensive reviews, multiple states plus the feds, they have combed through the voter rolls. And what you find time and time again is, are there some times where you find that non-citizens have somehow inadvertently ended up on the voter rolls, and even less frequently that they've actually cast a vote? I'm not going to tell you that it never happens. I'm going to tell you that it almost never happens. And it happens so seldomly that I've never been able to identify a single instance where it would have changed even a local election result. So sometimes what we find, and I'll just give you some examples. Sometimes we'll find people where they have a sort of circuitous route to whether they're a citizen or not, and people who genuinely don't know if they're citizens. I know you think, well, that sounds strange. There are people that we found that are Native Americans and are on tribal land, and somebody was adopted, or like, we have found very strange sets of circumstances where it takes us months of investigating to find out if somebody is even a citizen or not, let alone whether they know they're a citizen or not. I know it sounds strange, but that does happen from time to time. Every once in a while, there is something that goes wrong where somebody ends up on a voter list because they got a driver's license at their Secretary of State's office, or a state ID, and they end up in the wrong bucket. It happens very once in a while. Even less than that actually happens is that a person comes in and actually casts a ballot. So I'm not going to say that it never happens, but it is so infrequent. I know we would like to say that every system is completely perfect, right? But, I look at it like, banks, right? I mean, they have all of these safety and security procedures, right? They have surveillance cameras, and they have sophisticated alarms, and they have those like exploding die packs that the tellers can put in the bags. And it is so rare. It is so rare that anyone actually is able to successfully rob a bank. It doesn't mean people aren't going to try, but that's what all the security measures are for. And so, being involved in this process now for as long as I have, I can say, like, I have complete and total confidence in our elections, so long as you don't have a concentrated effort to undermine it by committing illegal acts. And who's committing those illegal acts? Well, it might be our own federal government. And that's the thing that's most concerning of all.
Well, yes, because, we hear about China. He may have made a big speech recently about China. We hear about Russia. We hear about all these foreign influencers who are trying to access and undermine our elections. And it's really hard to swallow the notion that the greatest threat to the American electoral system is the United States president and the Republicans in Congress. I mean, it is bone-chilling, especially when he controls your office on a national level. The Department of Justice, the Attorney General. It's really scary.
In having a conversation yesterday with the Deputy Secretary of State, they had a meeting with CISA, which they haven't had in a very, very, very long time. Normally, they have regular meetings with them. And essentially, CISA, that normally monitors these threats that might come from overseas or from our foreign adversaries, they're not doing any of it anymore. Like, they've just stopped doing that.
Yep.
And again, like, please tell me, how is it that you are trying to ensure that our system of elections is more safe and more secure when you've completely abdicated this very important responsibility. Now, does that mean that our elections will be undermined and that we'll have, people voting who shouldn't or inaccurate results? It doesn't, but does it mean that there could be a whole bunch of like bomb threats that gets called in so that you have a bunch of precincts that are evacuated while they have to bring in, a bomb sniffing dog and then clear the area? Yeah, it does. So those are the kinds of ways that you can interrupt and interfere with the election. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be a very democratic election. It just means that you're going to have to work harder to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to vote.
Well, Trump he went back to the Supreme Court to revive restrictions on mail-in voting that the lower courts blocked. How concerned are you that the Supreme Court could effectively change the rules of this election with the midterms less than 3 months away?
Well, there's never a time when a case goes to the United States Supreme Court that I don't get worried. I mean, that's just where we are right now. So, I can't say from the perspective of like, could there be a zombie apocalypse? I guess that could happen. I mean, you never know. But I would say it would be catastrophic to our elections if the Supreme Court would allow this executive order to go through. It would disenfranchise, millions of Americans from being able to vote. And frankly, it's so late for it to happen right now. If they were even to do that, not only would you have millions of people disenfranchised, but I don't think that our election clerks could properly administer the elections. And there's just no way that you could compile such a list in such a short period of time. And the U.S. Postal Service, that it's had problems for a while. I'm not saying it's totally untrustworthy, but I would remind you that in 2020, there were a number of Democratic AGs that actually had to sue the Postmaster General, sue the United States Postal Service because they were deliberately slowing down the mail. They were doing things like they were stripping out distribution sorting equipment, and they were also limiting the hours that the postal workers could work to deliver the ballot. So we actually had to get a court order that said on election day that the workers for the Postal Service had to take every single mail-in ballot that was sitting there at the Postal Service, some that had been sitting there in distribution centers for 3 or 4 weeks without movement, and they had to go to the clerk that they were destined to go to by 8 p.m. so that they could be counted for the purposes of the election. And I actually myself had to go to a couple of distribution centers in Pontiac and in Detroit and was escorted around with my court order, literally in my hand, saying, there's a ballot, there's a ballot, there's a ballot. And some of them had been postmarked a month earlier. So, that's a legitimate concern I have. And it's another reason why this executive order could never actually work. So I'm not saying that the court couldn't possibly hear this case. And I'm not saying that they could not possibly rule in his favor. I am saying that's the end of our democratic elections as we know it if that happens.
Yeah. Have we dodged a bullet with the SAVE Act, with Republicans saying, hey, time to go home for 5 weeks? Or do you think when they come back, we're going to be dealing with this again?
Well, first of all, I think it would be found unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. I think there's no way that would, withstand judicial scrutiny. So if it ever did pass, if it had immediate effect, we would immediately seek a court order. I can tell you the Democratic AGs would not sit back and watch as millions of people around the country got disenfranchised from the opportunity to vote. I think it's way too late for the purposes of this election, irrespective. So I don't think any court would say that this, such an act would go into place for the purposes of the 2026 elections. And we would challenge it so that it could not go into effect for the 2028 elections or ever. Mm-hmm. And there's a million different reasons for that. But again, this is just an effort to disenfranchise voters. And again, you're trying to address a problem that doesn't really exist in terms of non-citizen voters. And you're trying to manufacture a problem out of thin air. So it's just really concerning. I wish like everyone would go through the process and everyone would truly understand exactly how it works And then people wouldn't have these sort of nightmare scenarios in their head because, again, I mean, these are really secure processes.
I think, again, that is such an important point because if people did really understand how the system works on a state by state level, and therefore how difficult it would be to coordinate and pull off a quote unquote stolen election, they probably would sleep much better at night. Trump can't control the election, but he can try to control people and what they do leading up to that election. And I guess that's his goal. Just like with everything else he does, it's all about lies and propaganda and intimidation. And I hope people are this time smart enough to not be susceptible to those kinds of things as much as they may have in the past.
I would say that, to a certain extent, maybe he wants to drive voter apathy. Like, what difference does it make if I vote? The system's rigged, so it makes no difference if I cast my ballot or not. I will say I don't think it's working in Michigan. We had, record turnout for the primary. There was so much excitement. And in, a great number of people were involved in this election. And, we had higher youth turnout than we've had in a very long time. Seniors always love to vote, but they especially love to vote in this last election. I mean, we had people who are really interested. And I think that's really what Trump is afraid of. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to have high turnout for the midterms because he knows that people are really motivated to vote against him. Obviously, he's not on any of these tickets, but really against the people that he endorsed and the people of his own party. I heard him say the other day, people are mad at Republicans, but they love me. And I was like, just keep thinking that, buddy.
Yeah, keep talking. I always say, more please, keep talking. What about his alarming statement this week about the possibility of declaring a national emergency and federalizing the midterms because of suspected election fraud? Because here's the nightmare scenario. Democrats win critical races in Michigan and other swing states, and he immediately declares there was massive fraud. What happens next? Who protects the ballots, the voting machines, and election officials if the FBI, the DOJ, or U.S. troops come knocking?
So what we've tried to do in Michigan, and let me just first address your question by saying Trump is constantly doing illegal things by declaring some sort of an emergency. He's done that over and over again. He did that with the tariffs case. Didn't really work out so well for him. He's declared energy crises that have kept, old coal plants that were supposed to be decommissioned online. Yeah. I mean,
he's done it with immigration,
Immigration, right, exactly, because he can't get anything through Congress to do it legally. And so to go it alone, he has to declare some sort of an emergency. But, in that event, I mean, we'll do what I've been doing, unfortunately, all these years since I've been in office, which is we'll take him to court. And at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is, will federal officials follow court orders? We have tried our hardest to make our magistrates and our judges in both the Eastern District and the Western Districts of Michigan very aware of just how nonsensical these claims are, and that many of these claims have already been made in previous elections and thoroughly debunked in the courts. So we tried to make them aware, listen, if anybody says any of these various different things, do not give federal agents a search warrant to come and take our tabulators or to come and take our ballots, because once you do, it's too late. And so, we're not talking about these are drug dealers who are going to take the cocaine and flush it down the toilet. The tabulators will still be there. The ballots will still be there. If federal agents come seeking a warrant of some kind to seize equipment or anything else, let's have an evidentiary hearing. Because we've done this in the past. We have had efforts in the past, not necessarily by the feds, but by other actors. Sometimes it's the Michigan Republican Party. Sometimes it's the RNC. Sometimes it's other Trump-allied organizations who have tried to say, for instance, in 2022, that we have to throw out all the mail-in ballots. No mail-in ballots in the entire city of Detroit should count. That was a real lawsuit that we had to defend. And, the courts found it laughable and they threw it out. And I think that, the courts are savvy enough to know and understand that by this point. And so and I mean, we're going to invite the federal judges in to watch as we test our tabulators and to see exactly how the system works, so that when they get something on their desk, they can already identify, look, that's not how things work. I know. I looked into it. I checked it out. I was offered the opportunity to see how, the counting board in Detroit works, say, or something like that. But the fact is, I think that the courts now understand, and this is not just when it comes to election-related cases. This is across the board. You can't trust the DOJ anymore.
Right.
And it's really sad and it's really tragic, because it used to be that when you had an assistant U.S. attorney walk into a federal courtroom, walk into a federal courthouse and say, I'm James Smith representing the United States of America, it used to mean something. And you knew that you could count on the word of that attorney, and that they would be making accurate representations based on the law and based on facts. And they can't anymore. And you've had federal court after federal court in their own judgments and in their own decisions say, you lied to me, DOJ. You lied, it's reprehensible, and sometimes it's sanctionable. So I don't think there's this automatic faith and credibility that the DOJ has that they once had. It's going to take years to restore that, unfortunately, but it's not going to happen overnight, and it's certainly not going to happen while Trump is in office.
Yeah. I want to push you a little bit. I mean, around here, they call me Optimistic Andy. That's just my natural hardwiring. But I want to push you a little bit and say, okay, let's play this doomsday scenario out a little bit. From a timing perspective, can it all work? So, for example, if there are FBI, DOJ troops literally stationed outside key district polling places, and then Trump says, I just declared a national emergency, and within minutes, those people are entering the polling places, taking machines, whatever. Like, does that become this standoff between Mary Smith, who's some 55-year-old volunteer poll worker, and someone with a machine gun saying, I'm taking them now, and then you got to rush into court? And it just seems chaotic. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But what happens if that does?
Yeah, does Trump want to turn every polling precinct into a Tiananmen Square type of situation?
Right.
I mean, what I will say is this. I am prepared to go into court ahead of time. And based on many of the statements that the president has made and that others have made at the DOJ, to go in ahead of time and preemptively get a court order and have it say, these are the following things that are not allowed, whether it's whether they're federal agents that have come from the FBI, or whether they're ICE agents or CPB, sorry. I mean, it could be a number of different types of federal agents that we're talking about, right? Or the National Guard gets federalized. I mean, the list goes on and on. I'm prepared to get court orders ahead of time so that we can then have people from Michigan State Police or from my office or from municipal police departments hold up that court order, or to have the local clerk hold up that court order and say, you can't come in here. So says Judge, Smith or Jones or what have you. And now we're in a situation where are federal agents going to flagrantly violate a court order? Because if the answer is yes, now we really have civil war. I'm sorry. I agree. At that point, there's nothing more I can do because I'm a lawyer, right? So I have to count on the fact that all parties will respect a court's order. So far they pretty much have. I'm not going to say that the feds have never violated court orders, but for the most part, they comply. Sometimes they're a little late in their compliance, and we have to get additional orders to force them to comply. But generally speaking, they actually have. And let me just, draw to your attention when, of course, Trump tried to federalize National Guards in California and in, Illinois and in, Oregon. I mean, there were several places where he tried to do that. Those Democratic AGs went to court. They ultimately prevailed. The judges said you can't do that. And the next hour they were gone. Right. I mean, they just left. So you had hundreds and hundreds of National Guardsmen and women that just left as soon as a court order was obtained. And I use it as an example because that was a scary set of circumstances that seems like it was a million years ago. It was like a million lifetimes ago, but it happened. And you have to ask yourself, for these federal agents, if they are willing to violate the law, first of all, there's a very long statute of limitations for those illegal actions. And I don't know, Trump will likely not be in office, we don't know if he's going to be alive anymore by the time this could possibly be revisited by a future Department of Justice. And what, is he going to pardon everybody everywhere? I mean, and is every federal agent going to say, I am going, they took an oath of office, and are they going to completely disregard that oath in obedience to this 80-year-old man who, can't stay awake for more than 10 minutes at a time? I mean, come on, I just have to hope, like you say, you're an optimist. I wouldn't call myself an optimist, but I am trying to be practical about this. And I just don't see all of those people deciding to violate their oaths of office, violate the law, and do so at Trump's behest, especially at a time where he's less popular than he's ever been. So,
Well, that's why I say I'm an optimist, because in practical terms, the way you've explained things and other things I've heard and seen, and just my own sense of rational thinking, that's what leads me to be optimistic about back-end shenanigans. I'm more concerned about just making people at home feel like, you know what, I'm not dealing with this. Should the message from the DNC and Democrats all over the country be vote early, vote by mail if you can? Just take away as much opportunity for him to create chaos on Election Day? Because I don't feel like I'm hearing that enough. And I feel like that's one, you said it before, like that is one surefire way to minimize the impact of all this on Election Day. Vote early, vote by mail.
Well, some people would say, no, vote in the way that you've always voted, or vote the way that makes you most comfortable. I'm not one of those people. And I do try to encourage people to get their ballot in as early as possible. During our early voting, like you can take your absentee ballot that you received and you can drive it in and, go into the early voting site and actually run it right through the tabulator so you can make sure that it counts. But yeah, I think the more people that we have that have voted already by Election Day, the easier it'll be to count the ballots on Election Day, and also, check, that's already done. So let's say there is a bomb threat at that location, or some other type of disruption, or you have somebody who comes in, and it might not be somebody, from the military or federal agents. It might be an imposter who's pretending to be that. Whatever it is, less people on Election Day, less chaos on Election Day. And so we're trying to do all kinds of things to encourage that. I've been encouraging the local clerks, and they have the ability to do this, to deputize somebody who can go out and get people's ballots and just go out and collect them. And I know for a lot of seniors and a lot of other individuals that have, disabilities or transportation issues or whatever, we just want to make sure that their ballot is in and that we're not relying on the Postal Service too late. Because the last thing, and I think the worst thing, is to see all the ballots that get delivered on the Wednesday after the election when they're not going to count anymore. And sometimes they will count. It depends on the set of circumstances. So I don't want to say that broadly. And we have additional time for, veterans who are active service members who are serving overseas. There are times where ballots can count, even if they come in after Election Day. But for the most part, of course, that's not true. So, I think there's many different things that we can do and that we're going to do at our department to encourage people to vote early, and to make sure you're just, you check that off your list of things to do and you're not waiting until the last minute, especially if you have to register to vote. And I will say this, and please hear me, college kids, we want you to vote, but could you not register to vote at like 7 p.m. on the day of the election? Just, a little bit of foresight, because we still see that a lot on our college campuses, and we want to encourage voting, but let's not give our clerks a panic attack either.
And you just created a webpage to guide Michiganders through this process overall. Can you speak to that for just a moment?
Yes, we have a website you can go to. It's mi.gov/AG elections. And it's your one-stop shop for everything that you need to know about the midterm elections, about registering to vote, where to vote, how to vote, when to vote. It's all the information that you would need.
The last thing I want to say is, it's not a question. It's just, over these last few weeks and until the midterms, I'm trying to dedicate as much of my podcast to speaking with people like yourself, attorneys general, secretaries of state, so that we can continue to just put this information out, because I think it's a cause and effect kind of thing. And I just want to thank you on behalf of everybody who never used to hear about an attorney general or a secretary of state, but now really understands just how important the roles are that you're serving, that you put your jobs, your reputations, your lives on the line to defend this very fragile electoral system. And I want to thank you again for that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I will tell you that when the first time I ever ran for office was in 2018. And if you would have told me I would go through 2 Trump administrations, an effort to subvert, a presidential election, COVID, and whatever the hell else is going to happen between now and January 1st, I never would have believed it. But, the things that Michigan went through in 2020, and there's too much of it to recount that people really don't remember. But, it ended with Ken Paxton, Attorney General of the state of Texas, trying to decertify the elections in the state of Michigan. I just never would have believed it. It didn't work. But now that guy is the nominee for United States Senate in Texas. And it makes me profoundly sad. But I think it should make us more determined than ever to know that, having the right people in these positions truly does make a difference, and it truly matters. So I thank you for that comment.
Well, thank you for your time. This has been a very important conversation, and I hope you'll come back before the midterms and chat with me again.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me on.
Alrighty, take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhiniecliff, with additional editing by Matty Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Lengyel. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.